Okay, we have one more example to do for this lesson and then we will be done. After this lesson, I am going to provide either video-based or written instructions on how you get a grade for the learning that you did during the session. So just remember you have at least one other page in the module in this asynchronous session to work through. Okay, so argument 3. When it comes to this argument, I would like you to try to label the argument correctly but not do the argument pattern, because if you don't label the argument correctly, then you won't do the argument pattern correctly. All right. And actually, before we continue with that example, I just realized that I do want to reinforce something. I don't think I did the best job with this. But one thing that I want to reinforce is that I think we are going to use this space. So we're going to use this space for something else later in the semester. But patterns, add this, show, present the order of statements. S means statements by function. Function means is the statement or a premise or a conclusion as that is the statements, occur in the original argument. Okay, oops. So again, I'm clarifying because I don't think I did the best job earlier, but patterns show or present the order of statements by function, whether something's a premise or a conclusion, as they occur in the original argument. This is going to be really important to remember when we learn about something called argument diagrams when we build on top of this lesson. Okay, so that said, I would like for you to, it looks like I need to work on the focus for this. Give me a second. And just in case that was fuzzy, I'm going to go back to here to show you what I was doing. I was clarifying what I mean by patterns, what the job of a pattern is. And the job of a pattern is to show, so write this if you haven't done so yet, is to show or present the order of statements by function as they occur in the original, that's short for original, O-R-I-G, period, argument. Really, the period should be over here. All right, so I don't want you to do the pattern yet for argument 3. I want you to just try to locate the conclusion and the premises in this argument. And, I see something that we need to add to our notes. So go back to your notes. This is going to sound weird, but the word or phrase after all, 99% of the time is going to function as a premise indicator when I tell you something is an argument. It is never a conclusion indicator. That might sound counterintuitive because maybe you're telling the story and at the end of a story, you say, and after all that, it sounds like you're coming to a conclusion. But from the standpoint of logic and argument and philosophy, if I use after all as an indicator in an argument, it is definitely telling you a premise is coming, not a conclusion. Okay, so that's important because I have after all in this argument. So remember, the labels go where? At the beginning and above a given statement. And let's go ahead and circle any premise and conclusion indicators. This is something we'll always do in addition to doing the argument patterns. So go ahead and circle all and any premise and conclusion indicators, and then label each statement where you're supposed to place the label. I am going to pause for 2 seconds for you to pause the video, and then when I return, I'm going to assume that you really did try to do this on your own. Okay, so in this argument, you should have noticed the word after all, so we should have circled. And I just told you that that typically functions as a what? As a premise. Now, this means that. Let's see if that happens, if that's a clue that we can use as a phrase. This is why I like to go through the examples. Oh, yep, I forgot. So this example 3 might have been kind of hard now, I realize, because I forgot to put a conclusion indicator then. So we can still learn from my mistake, and that is that just because we see words here underneath premise indicator and conclusion indicators, that doesn't mean that these are the only words that can function as premise or conclusion indicators. That said, I tend to use the same ones over and over again, the ones that are most popular in philosophy and in everyday life. So this functions as a conclusion indicator. This functions as a premise indicator. Okay, so now that I've done that, I want you to try labeling the rest of the arguments correctly and then circling what you now know is another conclusion indicator. So I'll pause again, not long enough for you to do this, but long enough for you to click pause and try on your own. Okay, so we know that this means, that is typically functioning as a conclusion indicator. Now, for now, since we're just learning to analyze arguments via the logical, philosophical way, that every statement will have a function. So if I say, here's an argument, all the statements are numbered, then you know that every statement has a function. Since you know that we are working only with simple arguments, and you now know what simple argument means in this class, you know that statement 1 has to have a label and that it cannot be a conclusion since simple arguments have only one conclusion. So in virtue of the definition for argument, knowing what the job of a premise is, knowing what a conclusion is, using our college level reading skills, even if you're in high school, you're supposed to have college level reading skills if you're taking a college class. Using your reading comprehension skills, what do we know that this statement functions as? It functions as another premise, So the conclusion, the main point, the thing that the author is trying to convince you of is that argument analysis requires intellectual empathy. Why do they think that that is true or believable or plausible? Well, they say each argument presents a point of view. That's one reason they give. And another reason they give, it's actually presented first, is that intellectual empathy is needed to enter into points of view with greater clarity, precision, and accuracy. So now I want you to try to do the argument pattern for this argument. Pause the video and see if you can get the argument pattern. Okay, so remember, an argument pattern presents the statements of an argument as they occur in the argument by function. So the first statement is a premise, and then what comes next is a conclusion. And because there's another premise, we do have two P's in this version of an argument pattern because there is at least one premise that comes after a conclusion. So how does this map onto this? Statement 1, a premise, comes first. Then what comes next, what follows in the order of arguments, is a conclusion. That's statement 2. And then what comes next after statement 2, a conclusion, is another what? Premise. If we have only PC, then this does not accurately reflect the pattern of argument 3. This argument pattern saying there's at least one premise followed by one conclusion and that's it. But that is not true of argument 3. Argument 3 does have at least one statement that's a premise that then has a conclusion, but then there's another what? Premise.